cause of people not being successful is access to capital and then the relationship.
What if I told you that one of America's most powerful preachers almost died on live television, and what happened next shocked the entire world? This is a story of Bishop T.D. Jakes, and trust me, you're not going to believe how this unfolds. Picture this. You're watching your favorite pastor preach to thousands of people. Everything seems normal. Then suddenly he starts shaking. His hand drops the microphone. He falls over right there on stage. Thousands of people are watching in person, and millions more are watching online, as this man's life hangs in the balance. That's exactly what happened to T.D. Jakes on November 24th, 2024, and it changed everything. But before we get to that heart-stopping moment, let me tell you how we got here. This story starts way back when Thomas Dexter Jakes was just a little boy in West Virginia. He had a speech problem so bad that people thought he'd never be able to speak in public, let alone become one of the most famous preachers in the world. Kids at school called him Bible Boy because he was always talking about God and pretending to preach to his stuffed animals. Thomas grew up poor. His dad worked as a janitor and his mom was a teacher. They didn't have much money, but they taught him something that would change his life forever. They taught him to never give up, no matter how hard things got. And boy, things were about to get really hard. When Thomas was just 10 years old, his father got sick with kidney failure. Back in those days, especially for black families in West Virginia, medical treatment wasn't very good. Thomas watched his dad get weaker and weaker. He had to help take care of his father, do chores around the house, and even miss school sometimes. That's a lot for any kid to handle. Then the worst thing happened. When Thomas was 16, his father died. The family lost everything. They were so poor that some days they didn't know if they'd have enough food to eat. Thomas and his brother had to work any job they could find just to survive. Sometimes they had to choose between paying for water or electricity because they couldn't afford both. But here's the amazing part. Even when life was at its darkest, Thomas never stopped preaching. He would preach in tiny churches to crowds of just a few people. No money, no fame, just a young man with a big dream and an even bigger faith. In 1979, when he was 22 years old, Thomas officially became a pastor. That speech problem he had as a kid, it was still there. But people didn't care anymore. When they heard him speak, they could feel that he meant every single word. He wasn't just reading from a book. He was speaking from his heart about real pain and real hope. 2 years later, something beautiful happened. Thomas met a woman named Sarita at a church event. She had been through her own terrible experiences. Her brother had been murdered, and she had suffered abuse in past relationships. But when she heard Thomas preach that night, something special happened. They fell in love fast and got married just 6 months later. Their early marriage was tough. They had no money at all. Sarita worked nights as a radio DJ while Thomas preached during the day. Then disaster struck again. Sarita was in a terrible car accident that crushed her legs and feet. Doctors weren't sure if she'd ever walk again. But Thomas wouldn't let her give up. He helped her learn to walk all over again, step by painful step. That experience made their marriage unbreakable. In 1980, at just 23 years old, Thomas opened his first church. It was called Temple Faith Church, and it had exactly 10 members. 10 people. That's all. They rented a tiny storefront that was freezing cold in winter and burning hot in summer. Sometimes they were so poor they had to collect empty bottles just to buy food. But Thomas had a vision that was way bigger than that little storefront. He started a radio show and paid $45 for just 30 minutes of airtime. That was a huge risk for someone with no money, but it changed everything. His voice started reaching people in towns far away. People who had never heard him preach before suddenly couldn't wait to tune in every week. The church began to grow. From 10 people to 100, then to 300. Thomas wasn't preaching easy, comfortable messages. He was talking to people who were hurting, people who were addicted to drugs, people who felt forgotten by the world. And they were listening because they could tell he understood their pain. In 1993, everything changed again. Thomas launched a TV show called The Potter's Touch on Trinity Broadcasting Network. Now, his preaching wasn't just in one room or even one town. It was in millions of homes around the world. People in over 100 countries started watching him every week. 3 years later, he made one of the boldest moves of his life. He packed up his entire church, including 50 staff members and their families, and moved from West Virginia to Dallas, Texas. He built something incredible on a 34-acre hilltop. He called it the Potter's House. The very first service at the Potter's House drew over 2,000 people. Within a few years, they were having 3 services every Sunday because so many people want to come. By 2000, more than 23,000 people were showing up every single week. The church grew to over 30,000 members, making it one of the biggest churches in America. But T.D. Jakes didn't stop there. He started writing books that sold over 20 million copies worldwide. He made movies that became huge hits. He created a business empire worth nearly $400 million. He even advised presidents. When Hurricane Katrina destroyed New Orleans, he went there with President George W. Bush to help. When Barack Obama became president, T.D. Jakes was there to pray with him on Inauguration Day. Through all of the success, T.D. Jakes and his wife Sarita raised 5 children who all became involved in ministry. One of those children was their daughter, Sarah. Sarah's story is incredible. When she was just 14 years old, she became a teen mom. Most people would have thought her life was over before it really began. But Sarah turned her struggle into her strength. After a failed marriage and years of raising her son as a single mom, Sarah started writing a blog where she talked honestly about her experiences. People connected with her story of overcoming pain and finding hope. She eventually married Pastor Teray Roberts, and together they started leading churches in Los Angeles and Denver. Everything seemed to be going perfectly for the Jakes family. T.D. Jakes was at the peak of his success. In April 2023, he announced a massive partnership with Wells Fargo Bank that would bring up to $1 billion into America's poorest neighborhoods. It wasn't just charity. It was a long-term plan to change lives in places that big banks usually ignore. The money started flowing in 2024 and 2025. The T.D. Jakes Foundation gave out $18 million in grants to 29 organizations across the country. Universities got money for new housing and mental health services. Foundations received funding to help entrepreneurs and fight hunger. It was exactly the kind of work that T.D. Jakes had always dreamed of doing. But then something happened that nobody saw coming. In early 2024, a federal lawsuit involving the famous rapper Sean Diddy Combs exploded in the media. The lawsuit made serious criminal allegations against Combs, including sexual harassment and trafficking. T.D. Jakes was never accused of doing anything wrong, but his name came up in the court documents. The lawsuit claimed that Combs wanted to use his connection with T.D. Jakes to improve his public image after being sued by someone else. Jakes' name was only mentioned once, but that was enough. The internet went crazy. People started making up theories and spreading rumors. Even though T.D. Jakes had nothing to do with the case, just being mentioned caused a huge controversy. Then things got even worse. In October 2024, a man named Dwayne Youngblood went on a YouTube show and accused T.D. Jakes of trying to sexually assault him back in the 1980s. Youngblood said he was 18 or 19 when it supposedly happened. He also demanded $6 million from T.D. Jakes or threatened to file a lawsuit. T.D. Jakes' lawyers fought back hard. They pointed out that Youngblood was a convicted sex offender who had been found guilty of crimes involving children twice, once in 2008 and again in 2014. They called his accusations false and said he was just trying to destroy T.D. Jakes' reputation and get money. On November 25, 2024, T.D. Jakes filed his own lawsuit for defamation. He said the accusations had hurt him physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He wasn't going to let someone destroy everything he had built with lies. But just one day before filing that lawsuit, something absolutely terrifying happened that changed everything. T.D. Jakes was preaching live at the Potter's House in Dallas on November 24th, 2024. Thousands of people were sitting in the church watching him. Thousands more were watching online from all over the world. He had been preaching for about an hour when something went wrong. He started shaking. His hand couldn't hold the microphone anymore, and it fell. He sat down on a stool, then suddenly collapsed. At first, People thought maybe he was just exhausted, but this was much more serious. T.D. Jakes had suffered a massive heart attack right there on stage, in front of everyone. The whole thing was caught on camera and went viral around the world. Church members rushed to help him. Paramedics were called. People watching online couldn't believe what they were seeing. Later, doctors told T.D. Jakes something that shook him to his core. He had been just 5 minutes away from dying. 5 minutes. If the paramedics had arrived any later, if they had taken him to the hospital any later, he wouldn't have made it. The blood clot had blocked the flow to the right side of his heart. Half of his heart had completely stopped working. The most incredible part is that he had been preaching with only half his heart working. The only thing keeping him going during that sermon was pure adrenaline. The moment he sat down, his body finally gave out. T.D. Jakes described what happened next as a near-death experience. He said he felt like he left his body. He saw white clouds and felt complete peace and silence. While everyone around him was panicking, he felt completely calm. He later said it was like a privilege, a spiritual moment that showed him what really mattered in life. That brush with death made him realize something important. He had spent his whole life building this incredible ministry, but he needed to make sure it would continue even after he was gone. He had already been thinking about the future, but now he knew it was time to act. On April 27, 2025, T.D. Jakes stood in front of his entire congregation at the Potter's House and made an announcement that shocked everyone. He said that his daughter Sarah Jakes Roberts and her husband Teray Roberts will be taking over as the senior pastors of the church. This wasn't just any church they were inheriting. The Potter's House has over 30,000 members and millions more watching online around the world. It's one of the most powerful religious organizations in America, and now is entering a completely new era. T.D. Jakes made it clear that this wasn't him retiring or stepping away completely. He called it a rebirth, not a departure. He would still preach sometimes and still provide guidance, but the day-to-day leadership would now be in Sarah and Teray's hands. This transition had actually been planned for years. In 2022, Sarah and Teray moved from Los Angeles to Dallas. By 2023, they were already working as assistant pastors, preparing for exactly this moment. Sarah had already built her own successful movement called Woman Evolve, which focuses on empowering women around the world. What makes this transition so special is how rare it is in big churches. Usually, when leadership changes happen, it's sudden or because of some kind of scandal. But T.D. Jakes planned every single detail. He was completely open about it with his congregation. It was deliberate and deeply emotional. Think about Sarah's journey for a moment. She went from being a 14-year-old teen mom who people probably thought had no future to becoming the leader of one of the biggest churches in America. Her story shows that no matter how bad things look, no matter what mistakes you make, you can still turn your life around and do something incredible. The story of T.D. Jakes and his family shows us that success isn't just about building something big. It's about building something that lasts. It's about overcoming every obstacle that life throws at you and never giving up on your dreams. From a poor kid with a speech problem in West Virginia to one of the most influential religious leaders in the world, T.D. Jakes proved that anything is possible if you have enough faith and determination. His near-death experience reminded him that life is short and precious. The controversies and accusations reminded him that success always comes with challenges. But through it all, he never lost sight of what was most important: helping people, building community, and passing on his legacy to the next generation. As T.D. Jakes begins this new chapter of his life, and as Sarah and Teray step into their new roles, one thing is clear: this story is far from over. The Potter's House will continue to grow and change lives. The next generation is ready to carry on the mission that started with 10 people in a tiny storefront in West Virginia. From almost dying on live television to passing the torch to his daughter, T.D. Jakes has shown us that life is full of unexpected turns. But with faith, family, and determination, we can overcome anything that comes our way. That's the latest on Pastor T.D. Jakes, and it's a story that's still being written. If this incredible journey inspired you, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and perseverance. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories of people who refuse to give up on their dreams. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.